That is My Wicked Twin. That's friend Brent Durner at My Wicked Twin. And that footage that you watched on the video was a ride that I took back in the fall up near a place called Huntsville, Ontario. If you've never ridden up there on motorcycle, and now some of you probably have, it is a great place to go, a great place to ride in the fall. The fall colors, as you can see, were popping out there. So if you didn't get a chance to watch the whole video, it's set to Tack Needle by My Wicked Twin. That originally came out in 2022. We're doing a re-release of that single, and it's coming out in early 2026. We're going to probably release that early January in 2026, and it's called Tack Needle. It's a great song. Check it out. My Wicked Twin, Brent Durner, a two-time platinum record holder and a 4-time gold record holder. So this guy knows a thing or two about writing music. So check it out. My Wicked Twin at IndieTunes.com or IndieTunesRecords.com or anywhere music is downloaded, streamed, or sold. You can find it in all those great places. So we're going to talk about a few things tonight. One of the things that I wanted to touch on, and I mentioned it in the reel earlier this week, one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about is some changes that have happened in the world of Spotify, or at least people think some things have changed fundamentally in the world of Spotify, and that somehow Spotify's new terms of service affect you as an artist or your friends that are an artist, whoever's uploading their music to download and streaming services. But that is not really the case. And I'm going to debunk that whole thing tonight and talk a little bit about the terms of service that you would have signed as an artist if you had originally gone the route of releasing your music yourself. So let's say, for example, you decided that you were going to release your music on CD Baby. Now, a lot of people started doing that back in the day, and I want to go historically and talk about, Napster and LimeWire, who were file sharing services that pre-existed Spotify and other download and streaming services. And, fast forward that a little bit, and then you've got, the advent of Lars Ulrich from Metallica suing Napster and effectively shutting Napster down. So there were some interesting things that came out of that. I'm going to see if I can find, I downloaded terms of service that I signed when I decided that I was going to publish music for artists. I'm going to see if I can find it here. I can't remember what I said. Oh, there it is. Oh, that is not that particular one. Let's see if I can find it. Maybe terms of service, maybe TOS. I'm not sure. Oh, there it is right there. Okay. So it's a terms of service that you sign with a download and streaming service when you decide that you're going to upload your music for the purposes of having it on Spotify and iTunes and Tidal and Deezer and Amazon Music, all those different music streaming services and download services. Let's say you want to get your music out there. Prior to CD Baby and DistroKid and Ditto and TuneCore and a few others, as an independent artist, you could not upload your music unless you were on a major record label. Now, being on a major record label gave you the privilege of being able to have your music uploaded to download and streaming services. So let's roll back, okay? So let's go back, and I'm just going to type in here, when did Napster... Did you know this? Do you know this? If you know this, I want you to go over to the chat room and put it in there. But otherwise, I'm going to type in here, when did Napster gets shut down? Does anybody know? So Napster was originally a file sharing service. It was a peer-to-peer file sharing service that was originally designed for people to share MP3s and music libraries and all this other stuff that they had downloaded digitally. However, it became a major source of strife for a lot of artists when they realized their music was being given away for free and there was no way for them to recoup any kind of royalties off their digital works that were being largely uploaded by Napster and LimeWire users alike. And they were uploading this music for free. And Lars Ulrich said, well, wait a minute. Why aren't the rights holders earning any royalties from this? So Napster officially gets shut down in July 2001, right? And then it had legal battles over copyright infringement, primarily a lawsuit filed by RIAA, which is an artist like Metallica. So there were several that jumped on the bandwagon to sue them. But largely, I believe it was Lars Ulrich that was leading the charge here. Following the shutdown, the company filed for bankruptcy in June 2002, with its assets being liquidated. So there were a whole lot of different things. The Recording Industry Association of America was also involved in claiming that Napster was facilitating the illegal distribution of copyrighted material. So that got challenged, 2002. So when did Spotify start up? Do you know? So Spotify launches in October 7, 2008. So we're talking 6 years. There's really there's nobody, there's no, buddy out there having the ability for people to listen to downloaded music, stream music, etc., etc. Along comes Spotify 2006. Does anybody know when iTunes started? Well, let's do it. When did iTunes come out? When did iTunes start? Well, let's just say when iTunes start. So iTunes first released January of 2001. And it was originally introduced as a music player and jukebox software for Mac computers. So this was like early onset download and streaming stuff. So we're really talking the infancy here of the internet, right? Because the internet really didn't, really get rolling until the early 2000s. So now you've got, Apple Music, iTunes in their earliest versions, and then Spotify comes along, in 2008. It was founded in 2006, but the public streaming service became available about 3 years later. It took them like 3 years to get this developed. Now, as I understand it, Spotify is no lightweight when it comes to download and streaming. Neither is iTunes, neither is Apple Music, and others that have music on their platforms. So here's a little history lesson for all of you. Go back and take a look at LimeWire, DistroKid. Sorry, not DistroKid, that came later. LimeWire and Napster. Take a look at the histories behind them when they got shut down, and then the advent of download and streaming services. So we're still talking early 2000s when the internet really starts, changing and things moving along a lot quicker. And then along comes Spotify, and they build this massive download and streaming service. Now, as a download and streaming service starting out, they needed to purchase catalogs of music. What did they do at the time? They approached the major record labels. Like there were 3 major labels at the time. And I'd have to do the research here, but I know Universal Group being one of them, Sony, and then there's a whole bunch of subsidiaries involved in there, and I think Warner Music and a whole bunch of others that were involved in sort of the digital world and wanted their catalogs for their artists published on legitimate download and streaming services where their artists could earn royalties. So we go back to Spotify. Spotify approaches these major record labels, said, we want to purchase your catalog. We want to have access to your artist catalog. Now, these record labels were the primary rights holders. Okay, I want to talk about this, for example, because this is a part that gets missed by people. And we're going to talk about it a little bit when Mike Brandvold comes on the show. I'm hoping on November 26th that Mike should be on the show. We'll talk a little bit about this next week as well. I think my friend Michael Muscat's joining me next week. Great bassist from Windsor, Ontario. We're going to talk about things, all music things next week. Hey, Kyle, there's a great history lesson for you, brother. So go back and take a look at Napster and LimeWire and their role in file sharing services, which were primarily MP3s. And we're talking low-grade MP3s, right? 128 megabits per second. And maybe even, less than that, right? Very, very low quality MP3s. And then fast forward, now you have these services that have lossless content. So if you subscribe to a download and streaming service that has artist music in lossless content, you're probably listening to digital master recordings. Now, if you're an audiophile, it don't get any better than that in the digital world. That is basically what the person mastering the track listened to after it got mastered. So this is a fully mastered wave format. Probably some of them are upwards of 64 megabits, maybe bigger. Some of them are really big files, and they're uncompressed, which means that you get to hear all of the spectrum. The whole listening spectrum is there in an uncompressed format for you to listen to. So this is where lossless content came in. This is a fast forward. Lossless content has only been in the last maybe 3-4 years that they've really gotten good at this. And part of the reason is the ability for them to build massive servers that can house these programs so that you can, as an audiophile, listen to music in lossless form content. And if you've got really a great stereo system or a great set of earbuds or something high quality, you're probably going to hear the difference, right, between it and a compressed MP3, because you're going to hear the whole dynamic range of the recording as the mastering engineer heard the final mix before they actually mastered the recording. So you're actually listening to a digital master if you're listening in lossless format. Now, something we do on our website, and it's to conserve some bandwidth, we upload MP3s 320 kilobits per second. That's still pretty quick. And again, you'd have to have like a really, really great ear to detect the difference between that and probably 16-bit, which is CD quality MP3. So you can fast forward now and look at the investment that was required by Spotify and other streaming services to just get in the game, right? And when they started those streaming services and decided how they were going to pay artists, that was based on artists that were on major record labels. So those streaming services like Spotify and iTunes and others, they signed licensing agreements with Sony Entertainment and the major record labels of the day in order to be able to have access to their catalogs of music. And those record labels, Brent Durner and others will attest to this, in many cases, probably 99% of all cases, the rights holders for the music were the record labels. They basically got the artist to sign away all their rights. And there's a number of reasons why. Part of it was control. Part of it was being able to funnel all of the royalties through one business entity. Because music royalties can come from several different sources. And these are ways that you can set yourself up for success. So that's that other part I was going to talk about. How do you set yourself up for success? By building the opportunity to develop multiple revenue streams from your music. Now, when they negotiated these terms of service with these major record labels, they decided it was going to be roughly a 1/16 of a cent per stream. This was based on the premise that the artists on those labels were going to have hundreds of millions and maybe even billions of streams. So you can imagine if they set the payout too high, if it's based per stream. So this is a bean counter counting the number of streams, right? And paying out based on those number of streams. So if you do the math on that, let's say a band is going to, they're going to put their music out there and they're looking to get maximum number of streams, okay? So if you had a 1/16 of a cent and it was based on 10 million streams, you would make $160,000 off 10 million streams. Okay? If you have 10 million streams, that's one track, by the way. Okay? Let's say the whole album, each track on the album gets 10 million streams. That means that you made $1,600,000 off your album. Because essentially we're talking 100 million streams. So when the download and streaming services came into being, their idea of remuneration for artists or rights holders, and they're not always synonymous. So the artist isn't always the rights holder. They might be, but if they don't own the publishing rights to their music and they don't own the digital masters to their music, they only get whatever their contract says with the record label. Now, that contract may not even include digital. You got to pay attention to the fine print, folks, because it could exclude certain things, or it could include certain things, or certain thresholds where the payout doesn't come unless the label gets recouped first. So let's say the recoupment for the label is $10,000 or $50,000. Then the first 50 grand of the streaming is going to go to the label before the artist even starts to earn their share. And then their share with the label still may only be 16 cents on the dollar. It depends whatever the contract between the label or the rights holder and the artist is. Now, if the artist happens to be the rights holder, they own the publishing, they own the digital masters, now they have the ability to collect 100% of those royalties, but they got to find a way to funnel that money to them. And then they have to look at, okay, how can I develop multiple revenue streams? Well, multiple revenue streams on digital streaming services can come in the form of developing an organic following of premium music users. Let's just say you targeted iTunes and Spotify. And what if your target was to have 1,000? This is my rule of 1,000. If your target was to have 1,000 followers on iTunes, 1,000 followers on Spotify, so that's two major streaming services. That's 2,000. That's 2,000 followers. Now, let's just imagine that those 2,000 followers, you put out a call to action to your followers because they follow you on Spotify, and you put out a release, and you can put a message out to people that are on your release list so they can sign up for notifications when you release new music on Spotify. And they'll get notified when you've got new music coming out. And you could place a call to action to those 2,000 followers. Remember, 1,000 on Spotify and 1,000 on iTunes, okay? And your call to action is, please stream our song day one time. So that means on both streaming services, you got 1,000 streams day one. What's that going to do to the algorithms in those streaming services? A whole lot of things are going to happen as a result of that, right? It's going to come up in the algorithms, and your music is going to be pulled up through the algorithms. Now, can you imagine if you had 2,000 followers on iTunes and 2,000 followers on Spotify, and you said to those 2,000 followers, here's my challenge to you, and you could really, really help us out here, and it's completely legit because you guys are all premium holders, right? Your monthly subscribers to Spotify or your monthly subscribers to iTunes. Would you please stream our song 10 times today? Each of you. Now, because they're followers and they're engaged because they've given up their email addresses, they're probably willing to do that. Could you imagine if 2,000 followers streamed your song 10 times in one day? What is that? That's a lot of streams, right? You got 2,000 people streaming your songs 10 times in day one. That's 20,000 streams. Now, let's say you put that challenge out to them for the next 7 days from a release day forward. Would you please stream our song 10 times a day? Put it in your playlist. Get your friends to add it to their playlist. But let's just go with basically the raw number here and say, okay, it's times 7. Oh my God, that's 140,000 streams in the first week of release. Could you imagine that? Now, what would happen to those algorithms in Spotify, in iTunes, if that were to happen? Those algorithms would go absolutely bonkers, right? And those algorithms would do a number of things. So Spotify has this great suggestion. And I listen to Spotify a lot because I discover a lot of new artists on Spotify. There's Discovery Weekly on there. There is Discovery Radar. All new music that comes out every Friday, you can get notified of anything you're listening to that comes out. Now, the other cool thing about these algorithms is they'll also make suggestions, right? So let's say you're listening to, let's use a classic rock band that's been around for a long time and everybody knows them, Creedence Clearwater Revival. So let's say your music sounds like Creedence Clearwater Revival. In the suggestions in these algorithms, because you like CCR, you might also like, and that's where people start to discover music. And I've said to people for the longest time, it is not Spotify or iTunes that has set these remuneration rates. And again, those remuneration rates go to rights holders. The rights holders are the only people that are legally entitled to collect royalties. If you have a co-songwriter and you're registering your music with a co-songwriter, those people have to be here we go. These people have to be registered themselves as SOCAN artists in order for you to assign them their percentage of their writer's rights to the music. Ken McGinnis says, very interested in this subject as my stuff is on those platforms, but now we have our own webpage, gospeljungle.ca. Next, we will be making available for download purchases our single right from our own webpage. And that's not a bad idea, right? That's not a bad idea. We do that on our website at indietunes.com, and we have about 32 independent artists there that call our webpage, our website. It's actually a website. It's becoming more interactive as time goes on. And we're actually looking at developing a download and streaming service exclusively for independent music, because there's nothing like that out there, right? You can, and here's where, as an independent artist, you could set your music apart from other people. But there's ways of doing that now through the proper encoding of metadata on your tracks. If your tracks are not properly encoded, there's a good chance they'll land in places that you don't want them to be. So, for example, in the encoding in your music, the genre and subgenre should be there. And you should have decided long time ago what genre you fit into. Now, rock is a really broad category, right? Because rock essentially means popular music. That could contain certain elements of pop music, blues, and a whole bunch of other genres, subgenres that would fall under the umbrella of rock, right? But there is a cool thing you can do is you can add subgenres in there that further drill down and describe what you do. So it could be indie rock. If you want people to discover you as an independent artist, having identified in your tracks that you are an independent may well go a long way for someone who's searching for something different than the mainstream has to offer. So now you've been able to cover a number of bases. There are other pieces of metadata that you can embed in your tracks that will help algorithmic playlists and all kinds of other services out there properly rank your music. And you better be encoding your music in everything that you do with your music across the internet. I'm going to say that again. Your music should be properly encoded for its purpose, its intended use across the internet. And there's only a couple of places where you should actually be downloading. Yeah, well, yes, your tracks are encoded, but how are they encoded? Because there's some very, very specific metadata that is required. A lot of people just put the basic metadata in there. And the basic metadata in today's standard, now that you've got AI and all kinds of other abilities out there to read data that's embedded in a track, it's very important that there's specific data embedded in a track that undoubtedly proves that that digital master belongs to you, exclusively to you. If there is not adequate metadata out there and someone decides they're going to try and pirate your music, you may have trouble making a copyright claim. You may have trouble registering a copyright infringement. There's a whole lot of things that could go wrong there if you do not have your tracks properly encoded. And even major record labels have failed miserably at this I can attest to that because I have artists on my label that were signed to major record labels previous to working with me. And we found a lot of mistakes that were made. So just because you're a major record label doesn't mean you have all the dope on how to do the job. And just because you have software that you can use to embed metadata in your tracks, you better make sure that you've got the right metadata in your tracks to ensure a number of protective rights, and also the ability for AI and other pieces of cloudware to be able to properly interact with your music. And this is everything, including genres, subgenres, and other identifiable features that you would put in those tracks that would help all of these services properly identified, and also to make those algorithmic recommendations when people are listening to this. So let's go to what happened when you decided to use a download and streaming service. So I'm gonna put you on the spot, Ken. What download and streaming service, or sorry, what upload service did you use to publish your music? May I ask? Did you use CD Baby? Did you use TuneCore? What service did you use? You must have used a publish and distribution service, a publishing and distribution service. They're one and the same. And they will publish your music across the internet on those various services, some more or less than others. Some you have to do a whole bunch of other bells and whistles to hit those places. Last year, we penetrated 165 markets, and our artist music was heard in over 175 countries last year. Try getting that level of distribution with CDs and vinyl. Now, I'm not saying don't sell CDs and vinyl. It's great to have those tangibles. You should have them at your live shows, and you should be selling them at your live shows. If you're not, you could be missing the boat on a whole host of things. That's another revenue stream that you could create for yourself. Selling CDs, selling records. Both of those can sell because they're tangibles. There's artwork in them. Some of them actually have booklets in them. CDs, some CDs came with booklets, right? And those booklets have stories about the band, or stories about the record, or story how it was written. Yeah, so his debut was CD was distributed through CD Baby, the CD Sleeping on the Grass. So the question about that particular thing, have you continued to use CD Baby? Now, CD Baby started off primarily as a service that made CDs and helped you market the CDs. You could, as if I understand it correctly, you could order CDs yourself at a discounted rate, but they could also sell them online for you. And that was CD Baby's claim to fame. Then when digital came in, CD Baby had to make a jump. But there were a few things I found problematic with CD Baby and a few others. But again, I'm not going to delve into that a whole heck of a lot. All I'm going to tell you is some offer a great deal of flexibility and some offer more bells and whistles than others. But when you signed up with a service to distribute your music, you did not make an exclusive deal with Spotify. You did not make an exclusive deal with iTunes. It's a blanket license agreement. If you go and read your terms of service with your distributor, it'll start off something like this. This distribution agreement, terms of service, this agreement in brackets, is a binding legal agreement between you and your distribution company regarding the use of your service to distribute your musical recordings to select digital services and stores, right? And then there's a number of things that happen. There's a digital fingerprint that gets assigned to your track. That's called an ISRC, International Standard Recording Code. If you don't know what it is, then you're probably leaving money on the table. If you don't know how to use it, you're probably leaving money on the table. If you don't know that you can have your own artist ISRC, you may be leaving money on the table. If you don't know that those ISRCs should be registered so that you can collect royalties beyond what your distribution company can collect. So if you're with CD Baby or TuneCore or Ditto or DistroKid. Now, I use a label version of DistroKid because it's got a whole bunch of bells and whistles. And when I started doing this way back when, I was looking at it tonight, and I'm just going to go really, really quick into my music library, and I can't remember. I've got to take a look at my music here and go back to my very, 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 very first release on Indie Tunes Records. And this is hundreds of releases ago, because we've been releasing a lot of singles, a lot of albums. So the very first album to get uploaded was an actual EP by a band called Darkstone. And those guys originally are out of Burnaby, BC, and I believe the two brothers now live in Okotoks. And that became available February 1st of 2017. February 1st of 2017. So that we're talking back now, 7 years, no, eight years now, that I started using DistroKid. And the reason I went to DistroKid was because they were solely a digital distributor. And I wanted a sole distribution company who specialized in digital distribution. And so when Phil Kaplan started up the company, I wrote them and said, I'm looking for a record label version. I know record labels typically will use white label and other services for direct uploads, but I want you guys, because I know you're accessing new markets all the time, but I want some bells and whistles, and I want you to create a category for independent record labels like myself to be able to buy licensing from you. Anyways, the cool thing about it is that now I have access to all these great markets, and we're able to hit them now. We're hitting 165 markets, 175 countries. We had music listened to in places that, when I share it with the artists, they're like, they can't believe that people are listening to their music in far off places in the world, let alone in their own backyard. And of course, many of our artists on the label, their biggest listening audiences are in Canada and the United States, which are large consumers of music, but also the European Union, the UK, New Zealand, Australia. Those are really great markets to exploit. And even in places like China, where music, and Mexico, where music is starting to explode, and people are taking a greater interest in artist music. So there's some great things that you can do in terms of protecting your music and make sure it's registered appropriately. There are also licensing companies that you can sign up to where you can license your music so your music could be purchased. So let's say I want to buy your soundtrack because I want to put it on my movie. I want to put your track on my movie. I can buy the licensing. If you registered for sync licensing, I can buy a license to use your music, and you will get paid every time that track gets played. Now imagine the guy that wrote the opening song for Sons of Anarchy. Now, I don't know too many people that never saw Sons of Anarchy, but if you look at that, that's what I'm talking about, sync licensing. Every time that opening track got played, the rights holder of that track got paid sync licensing royalties. Again, this could be money you're leaving on the table. Here's another way to set yourself up for success. You get yourself licensed, get your music licensed for things like that. Yeah, you can cut out the middleman all you want, but you could be very limited, Ken. I'm going to tell you, you're going to be very limited because nobody gets the reach that Spotify does. And I'm going to tell you, this is why Spotify is not the big bad wolf. Spotify gives artists access to markets that no one would ever hear about, their music. And it might be a market that is really turned on to your music or your brand of music, and you could be missing out on it. Spotify is about reach, about discovery, and about engagement. If you use these download and streaming services as tools, they could end up becoming money-making opportunities. But remember, download and streaming services were not created for you. They were not invented for you. They were invented for major record labels and their rights holders. That's who they were invented for. And they were designed to serve them, and also all of these streaming services, iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, all of them are publicly traded companies. Some of them largely owned by professional investment companies like BlackRock and a few others, right? And there are investment companies that own them, and they have to pay dividends to their shareholders. Why? If you ever looked at how much it costs to do an upgrade on a major download and streaming services, which I believe they're still built on the backbone of a program called Python, which is like lightning quick, really, really fast, and allows millions and millions of users to be streaming the same song at the same time and not get hung up. That takes a massive amount of bandwidth. That takes a massive amount of computer processing power and servers that are dedicated for download and streaming service. So you can imagine how much money it costs to maintain a download and streaming service. And I was just talking to a tech buddy the other night who built my computer here in my studio for me. And it's a high-end gaming computer. And it's like, lightning fast and ahead of its time, which was really, really great because I needed something with a ton of horsepower. And what we found out is that components like chips now, processing chips, and all kinds of other components now there's a massive, massive call for these things now because AI, that's right, artificial intelligence, is a resource hog. And so now they're purchasing all of these processing chips and all this stuff to manage AI and all these AI programs that are out there. And imagine the servers that they have to run, because if AI is a resource hog, now those of you that think of resource hogs, you might think of Chrome. If you've got an older computer, Chrome can really suck down your CPU usage on your computer because it's a resource hog. And some slower computers, Chrome can use up to 50% of your CPU's capacity. Not really good because it slows down all the processing of your computer, including video and all kinds of other things. Also, having an updated video card makes a big difference too in terms of your ability to be able to translate music out in video. And now download and streaming services are now letting us upload high resolution music videos to the download and streaming services as well. This is something new that we started doing a couple of years ago, but they have some really specific rules and regulations around how that works. No lower thirds. You can't use to these particular services. There has to be a clean video, no text, no lyric videos, none of that stuff. It has to be all graphic and all based on artistry that visually depicts your song. That's the idea of it. So they're looking for a real artistic approach to video creation, and they're even sticky about AI. They're looking for actual digital creators out there to actually create really, really great high resolution videos, and some of them now can be uploaded in 4K. 1080p tends to be still one of the standards, and it's still pretty high resolution audio, high resolution video. And so you can upload in these particular fashions as well. But again, these download and streaming services never existed for you as an independent artist to publish your music. It was all designed for major artists who were going to get millions, if not tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, if not billions of streams, right? So that's why when you look at some of the payouts, they're like, a 16th of a cent, sometimes a 21st of a 21 100ths of a cent. It varies, right? It varies from service to service. It also varies from country to country. And I can only imagine that has something to do with the number of subscribers in those countries and maybe what subscribers are paying. And that may form a large part of the remuneration for artists. Now, on their free platform, Spotify has paid ads on there. That's another way for them to generate revenue. But when you have a large company like Spotify and iTunes and others that are providing these download and streaming services, and they have to do major upgrades, they have to raise working capital in order to do that. They can't take money out of, they oftentimes don't have money in operating capital to take on what most people would consider a capital investment. So they sell shares on the stock market in order to raise capital to take on these large projects of upgrading servers and all these other things to maintain their download and streaming services. And now that Spotify and other streaming services are now loading ebooks, and they're loading things like podcasts, there's so much out there now, so much audio content out there now, they've got to build more robust services to be able to manage all of these digital files. Those of you that publish regularly on Facebook will know that these videos that I post weekly, these live videos on my IndieTunes page, we got about 6,300 followers. We don't get that level of watchership. I wish we did. But when you look at that whole thing there, Facebook has started to pull those videos after 30 days, and it's because they're running out of room on their servers. Yeah, gospel radio stations, that's great if they like your stuff, if radio stations like your stuff. But here's the thing about radio stations: unless they are performance rights compliant, you will earn no royalties off your music. And most radio stations do not send the listener back to where the artist's music lives. Now, you're giving content to a radio station. What are you getting in return? There should be a return on investment. If you have no return on your investment, and I know artists who pay music trackers to get their music played on radio, but they don't even know if those radio stations are performance rights compliant. They don't even know if those radio stations direct their listeners to go back to listen to your music on Spotify or iTunes or wherever your music lives. So if those radio stations are not directing traffic back to your website or wherever your music lives, why are you giving them your music? Because you're getting zip in return. You should always get a return on investment. You give someone content for their radio show, ask them to direct their listeners back to your website. Get them to put a link to your website. If they're going to be using your content, get them to put a link to your website on their webpage. When they're playing your music on their show, maybe they could, in the chat room, post a link to your website, or at least share where people can find your music. That is going to render you something. But if radio stations like your music and they're playing it, but they're not directing your listeners back to your website or wherever your music lives, then the question is, what are you getting in return for the content that you're providing for their show? Coming up to the last 5 minutes of the show, and I always think, God, I'm not going to be able to talk about enough stuff here, but there's always lots of stuff to do. And most people think they know, but they don't know. And it's the stuff that you don't know that can make you miss the mark on so many opportunities with your music. And that is one thing that we do not want artists to do, is miss out on opportunities, not only to make money off their music, but to make sure that their music is actually heard out there. Now, here's the other thing. If you're a live artist and you play your music live, I don't remember being at a live show where the artist said, if you like our music, please follow us on Spotify. If you have a Spotify subscription, please follow us on Spotify. I've never heard an artist do that at one of their live shows. Oh, here's a better one. Get it, there's always an interactive piece, right? Where you're introducing the band or something else is going on the stage. Brent, you would know this from having been in a traveling band and a band that played at a lot of live shows. What would stop you? Well, the guitar player's doing a little tune-up, the drummer's doing a little in the background, and you say, as the front man for the band, get your phones out. I want everybody to get their phone out right now. I want you to go over to Spotify, and I want you to find us on Spotify, and I want you to hit the follow button. I don't recall an artist ever doing that at a live show. Now, if you follow us on iTunes, I'd like you to do the same thing on iTunes. Go on over to iTunes and add us to your playlist, add us to your weekly discovery, subscribe to us, follow us on iTunes, and guess what? You'll get notified every time we put out new music. Now, Spotify is really easy because they've got this really, really great algorithm in there for, Discovery Fridays. You can subscribe to Discovery Fridays on Spotify, and you can hear all the great music that gets dropped on a Friday, right? Spotify is not the big bad wolf. The big bad wolf doesn't really exist, and you signed a terms of service with your distribution company when you decided to put your music out there digitally. And when you do that, you're agreeing to a whole lot of things. You're agreeing to derivatives being made of your music. Now, people got their panties all tied in a knot about derivative works, and I'm going to maybe talk about that next week. So, Mike, here's your homework, Michael, for next week. Michael Muscat. What's a derivative work? How do they work? And how can you make sure that if your music is used in derivative works, that you could actually collect royalties on those derivative works. We're going to talk about that next week. We're going to talk about those ways that you can protect yourselves, those protections that you can put in place to guarantee that you are the copyright holder for your music, right? Or some entity is the copyright holder for your music. In some cases, and I've seen this, and I'll talk about this next week too, people that uploaded their music and then forgot their passwords and got locked out and can't get back into their profiles. This is not what you ever want to have happen. And that makes for an interesting, difficult journey for a label like mine to now pick up your music and try and build you a whole new profile when you got locked out of your old one and you can't even remember how to pull down your old music. That can be a problem. We'll talk about that next week. We'll talk about derivative works. And we'll talk about a few other things next week. You just never know what's going to happen here on the Indie Show. This has been Wednesday. This is Hump Day. Hope you have a great end of your week. This is the Indie Show. I'm Kenny. You're not. And I want you to have a great end to your week, everybody. We'll see you next Wednesday on the Indie Show. Cheers and peace out.